Hey there, welcome to the Eurostep Milwaukee Bucks podcast, proudly a part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and GSPN, and presented by our pals at Prize Picks. I am Ty Windish, one of your hosts, and your only regular host on this episode. Big time Rohan, as many are calling my lovely co-host Rohan Kadi, could not make this episode, so in lieu of that, I had the great Nathan Marzion of Twitter, Bucks Twitter, and Behind the Buck Pass, a great website, of course. Join me for a long Bucks discussion. I asked Nathan a Bucks question about every single player on the Bucks roster. He answered them all. We had a great discussion that, again, covered every player on the roster, which I love to do, to cover literally everyone except for the two ways on this one. And we also, as part of the conceit, had Nathan rank the Bucks in order of importance. So we went down the totem pole from Giannis all the way down to the rookies and young players. I won't spoil which ones, although I probably will put them in the right order in the description. But regardless, we went through all of them. So tap in for that fun discussion. For more Bucks and Milwaukee and Wisconsin sports content, go to gspn.info, subscribe to our premium feed over there hosted through Substack, get a commercial-free feed as well as bonus pods each and every week. Today, as you're listening to this, Andrew Snyder and I are recording just us. Primo, he told me he's got an electric cold open. Don't know what that's going to be. Can't wait to find out. Go subscribe today. There's going to be a lot more coming in, especially as football and basketball get started. Baseball, full swing. Brewers are winning as I record this. Hopefully they continue winning. Anyway, without further ado, enjoy my conversation with the great Nathan Marzion. All right. I am here with Nathan Marzion, Bucks Twitter persona. He didn't want me to call him Bucks Twitter icon, but I did it anyway. Nathan, thank you so much for taking the time. Excited to chat about the Bucks with you. We haven't had really any news. We had camp deals, exhibit 10s, which is how you know we're really in like the last phase of real news. Although we thought that last year, and then in September they got Dame. Don't really think that's going to happen right now. But before we get into kind of the exercise here, first, how are you? And second, how are you generally feeling about the Milwaukee Bucks as we record this on Wednesday, August 28th?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I love the show, and I'm very excited to talk some Bucks basketball because, as you said, it's been a while. It's been just kind of a lull for a while here, as it always is in August. You know, you have the whole free agency in July, and some trades go down and stuff. You make moves, and then kind of just wait until the season starts and preseason rolls around and stuff, barring any unforeseen trades. But yeah, I honestly have been telling people I know I'm biased. I know I say this probably every year. I feel very, very good about this team. It seems like they've gone from, they were so hyped up going into last year after the trade and all the eyes were on them, and they needed to kind of throw everything together at last minute. And this year it just feels like they've got the continuity now. They're under their radar. Dame's getting in shape. I love the moves they made in the offseason. Obviously you can't do much with the limited assets they have, but they were able to get, I think, 3 guys that can play in the playoffs, which is about as good as you can do with 3 minimum guys. And I just feel like this team is like in the perfect position now where they're kind of a sleeping giant. They're kind of a team that most people aren't talking about as a favorite. And I still think, when you get Giannis healthy, Dame healthy, Khris healthy, and with a decent supporting cast around that, and now with better continuity, now with, having an offseason with Doc and not having everything just thrown together, I think they can be really, really dangerous. And like, to me, I think there's a very realistic shot that they could still win another title here. So I'm very excited. I just want the season to start. I'm just pumped up for it.
I know every time I see like the new, given X player said something stupid about Giannis, or I think the latest was KG, whatever it may be. All I could think every time is like, let's just check ball. Like that's all I want to see. I just want to see the basketball now. I don't care how the Cavs or the Sixers round out their rosters. Like, I'm ready to watch the Milwaukee Bucks play basketball against them. And we'll get it right away as the season starts, of course, with the game in Philly. But very, very excited as well. And I would agree with everything you said. So let's get to all these players. So we're going to go through the Bucks rotation. I'm going to let you go. We'll go in your order of like, doesn't have to be necessarily minutes, kind of just like prominence in the rotation, right? Because Dame will probably play more than Giannis, but we can start with Giannis if you want. I've got a question that I think is at least on my mind for each and every one of these players that we'll go through. So do you want to start with Giannis? Do you want to start with Dame? And then we'll go from there and kind of, again, if you want to do minutes, if you want to do like importance of the rotation, we can do either way, really.
Yeah, let's start with Giannis. Start with the big name.
I think the big one here, and I think it almost sounds like a dumb question because it's like the big talking point for everyone, but do you think Giannis will roll more in 2024-25? And I think, again, it might, on the offset, you might, listening be like, yeah, obviously that's all they're talking about, the Giannis pick and roll, this and that. He doesn't love to do it, right? Like, I think at this point, if he hasn't explicitly said it, like we can tell if you watch the games, like Giannis is also a playmaker. Giannis also wants to have the ball. I think there's an idea that, he's just going to be a screen setter. I certainly don't think he's going to be that in any universe, even with Dame. But I guess, do you think he'll roll more, or like how much more do you think? Because I think there's more of a delicate balance there than some people think about when they look at the Bucks and the Bucks offense.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there's a middle ground, and I think it doesn't have to be, okay, he's barely going to do it or he's going to do it all the time. I think ideally, and I mean, we've been saying this for a long time, we wanted him to be used a little bit more off ball so that the attention's not all on him. It's harder to generate a defense against him. He can get the ball already in the paint instead of having to try to get to the paint. So obviously you want to see it happen more, and I think it definitely will happen more. They talk about working on the pick and roll, and Dame's talked multiple times on podcasts about how it got better as the season went along. They got their timing down a little bit. It got just all the synergy down. And they really did have some good stretches with it later in the year. And, it's something that, again, obviously you want to see it happen more, and I think it will happen more, but I just don't, as you said, he's just not going to become a screener roller, full time or even like most of the time. I think, you do still have to have that, have the ball in his hands a lot as a playmaker, as someone who can just draw attention to himself and then use that to others' advantage. I think him helping other shooters get open looks and help Dame out a little bit. Like, Dame's going to help him and Giannis is going to help Dame. And that isn't going to happen just by one action all the time, happening all the time. So I just think, there's a middle ground there. I do expect him to be used more as a screener and roller. And I hope that we know he's going to be willing to try that and do that, but I do hope it's something that they really, kind of work on a lot, because he's got some work to do with it. We saw that last year early on. You could tell it was like, okay, he's just not used to doing this full time. Like, he's not the best screener. He's not great at the timing of all of it. It got a little clunky at times. And again, you saw it get a little bit better throughout the season, but they never were totally able to nail it down. And another thing is just like during the regular season, I want to see the reps. I want to see them trying it. And then you get to the playoffs and maybe it's a little bit more comfortable. And instead of, just kind of not doing it much, and then you hope they do it more in the playoffs. Because that was another thing people talked about last year was, well, are they just saving it for the playoffs and when it matters? And it's like, when Giannis hasn't been used as a major screener and roller in his career, I don't think it's something you just save and throw out there in the playoffs, like just as like, oh, this is the first time he's ever really doing it.
I don't think teams would be taken by surprise either, right? It's not like this is like some mystery, like, some Brook Lopez, Khris Middleton. Like, I think teams are going to prepare for everything Damian is possible. So I don't think that was the case either. And I don't think that would make sense if that was the plan.
Yeah. So for me, it's always been something where I think Giannis naturally, and again, Dame has talked about how Giannis told him last year, hey, sometimes you got to tell me pass the effing ball. And I think Giannis is just wired like, okay, this is what I've been doing for 10 years. I take the ball, I go in, I draw attention, I kick it out, or I go in and score. And it's like, it takes time for him to get used to, and they've talked about this, get used to playing with each other and having another guy that can put up 30 and has those, or has that level of scoring ability. And it's just going to take time for them to get used to working off each other and using each other to each other's advantage. But I think that they will, continue to do that and do it a little bit more. Not going to be like some crazy change, I don't think, but I think there'll be a little bit of a noticeable, like, hey, they're trying it more, they're working on it more, and it's going to get a little bit better as the season goes along.
I would like to see it, I think, at least a couple times per quarter. Then you get to 10 per game pretty quick, and then you get up to like hundreds over the course of the season. I think that's fine. I think we saw some games last year, they'd end with it many times in a row, but I want to see it consistently throughout the games, right? Like, not just 6 in a row to end a game. Let's see it 3 in a row in the first quarter, especially if it's them two and Khris and Trent or others are out of the game. I think go to it more. I'm still fine if they kind of stagger Dame and Giannis to a bit. Like, I think it makes sense to want to have both top 75 guys out there the whole game. Like, I think there's intrinsic advantage there. And I'd also like to see them switch it up a little, like, have Dame pick and pop for Giannis. I think that could be a really fun and really devastating action too. I think we'll see that a lot less. I think if we don't want the 29-year-old 7-footer to screen, we probably don't want the mid-30s small guard to screen all the time, but I think that could be a fun action as well. Okay.
And I just really quick. Yeah, I just wanted to say you brought up, doing it late in games, and that's always been a huge thing, is when it gets to crunch time and when it gets to, okay, under 5 minutes, we need a bucket. That's when I'm more like, okay, go to that almost every time, because it's very reliable in the sense of, like, if you have one possession and I trust that it's going to generate a good look, that's probably the action I'm going to. Now, you're not going to do it all the time over the course of a whole game, but it's like in that moment, in those crunch time possessions, I want to see them really start to hammer it. Again, it doesn't have to be every single play. You still want to play within the flow of the game and everything, but whenever they are, have a half court possession and are able to get set and everything, like, that's what they should be starting with. For the most part. And I like that. Again, that's another thing that I noticed last year was, as the season went on, it seemed like late in games, they started to go to it more and more. There was few games in a row. I think it was when they were in LA.
Yep, against the Clippers and Lakers trip. The Bucks themselves have talked about that stretch too, of like, and Dame, I know, is like, we kind of finally figured it out, and then more injuries right after that.
Yeah, and it was like, I just remember that stretch being like, this is a few games in a row where they were in close games late, and they just consistently went to it and consistently got good looks as a result. And again, that's what I want to see. So, as you said, try to do it throughout the game, not just hammer it all late, but the one time where I'm really like, okay, I want to see this happen a lot is late in games when you're practicing your crunch time offense and it's like, we need a bucket.
Yeah, totally agree too. So I think probably a logical next step is to go to Dame, who we just spent a lot of time talking about as well. The question here is more amorphous. What is a reasonable expectation for Dame this season? Because I feel like I'm getting so personally excited about the combination of, like, the familiarity with Doc, seems to get along with Doc much better. They're like boxing buddies, right? They get together and talk about that. The conditioning, he's talked a lot about the comfort level with his personal life and his professional life. I think there's still going to be some sort of a workout with Giannis session. I don't know if that's necessarily happened yet, but still, like, all of those things together. And Dame, the way Dame is talking about, like, how people are talking about him and how he's being written off and he's just going to prove it. I'm very excited. What is the right expectation? So, like, I think Rohan and I have talked about, could he be an all-NBA player, an all-NBA guard this year, or like one of the best guards? Probably would have to be the best first or second best guard in the East to do that. Like, what do you think heading into the season, or what are you thinking about Dame in terms of, like, what can we realistically expect from him after a relatively down season, but with these positive things swinging toward him, I think, being better?
Yeah, I mean, as far as if I'm putting my expectation on what I think will happen, once again, I think it's something in the middle between what we saw last season and what we saw in Portland. Do I think he's going to be Portland Dame, putting up 32 a game and going absolutely crazy, putting up 70 multiple times and whatever? No, because it's a different situation. He's literally came here so that he didn't have to be that player anymore. And, I kind of tried to tell people that last year. I was like, I know he's disappointing based on what we expected, but, like, you got to remember, he's not going to be Portland Dame much anymore. He can still be from time to time, but consistently, he's not going to be Portland Dame because he's not Portland Dame anymore. He is Milwaukee Bucks Dame. He is, second best player on the team now, Dame. And he's trying to adapt his play style to win instead of just being the best player, put up 30 on a team that loses. So, again, I think he can be better than last year. I think get the efficiency up a little bit, the consistency up a little bit. Another thing I try to tell people is we're so used to Giannis and his consistency level because of the way he plays. It's impossible to stop. It's so it's relentless. It is, inevitable that he's going to get his points almost every single night. He's going to put up, good shooting numbers. When you are a small guard and you're shooting jump shots a lot, you're going to be a little bit more inconsistent. So I expect there to still be some inconsistency. There's going to be some rough shooting nights. You can go look at Steph Curry throughout the course of a season. He's going to have rough shooting nights. He's going to have bad stretches. That's okay. As long as it's limited to an extent. And again, last year I thought there was a little bit too many where you're like, okay, I want to see him get a little bit more consistent with it. But I think, you mentioned all NBA, like, to me, that's not at all out of the realm of possibility. My expectation, if like what I'd be guessing, is that he is kind of a fringe all NBA guy, probably misses it. But I would not be shocked at all if you told me he's going to be third team all NBA next year and be, like you said, the second best guard in the East. and maybe even like number one. It's like I could see that being a possibility. But again, I just don't think expecting him to go up to 30 something points a game is realistic. I would, if I'm just guessing his stats, I'd say 26-ish points, 7 assists again, maybe, and then again, maybe the field goal percentage goes up a little bit, 44, and the 3-point percentage hopefully goes up to like 37. Like that'd be a fantastic season, even though it's not incredibly eye-popping numbers. That'd be like, hey, for again, the second best player on your team, that's an incredible second best player.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you nailed it with the word efficiency. That's what I'm looking for. Even if his points don't change much, and like, you know, he was relatively, for his standard, inefficient last year. So even if he took the same amount of shots and just made them at a higher percentage, the points would go up a little. But you said 26. If it's like 23, 24, I don't really even care, to be honest. Like if we're seeing 45 from the field and high 30s, I mean, low 40s would be awesome. Whatever it may be from three, that's really what I'm going to look for. And I think that's all the Bucks need, especially on a whole season basis because of Giannis and the other guys we'll talk about. Trent Jr., like a young player, youngish compared to the rest of the roster, who can really take some of that scoring load, I think, as well. It's about the efficiency and just like being deadly in those possessions when he is on the court. So I totally agree. I think that's the expectation. And you know, Dame's case to make these things because of that probably would rely on like the team case and the efficiency case. The All-NBA now, I keep forgetting, is positionless. So it's really him against he has to be one of the best 15 players in the league. I don't think he's looked at that going into the season. I certainly think if he plays up to his standard, he could get in there or be kind of, you know, like Khris Middleton barely missed a couple times, should have made it the 1 year with the split votes. That was very silly. Would have made it on this system, actually, which is an unfortunate thing. But speaking of Khris, I'm guessing that's where you would want to go next here. The question here is, I think, less fun. Maybe the answer will be more fun. Do you think he'll play more or fewer games than he played last year? So it was 55 last season. And I asked this question because, like, I think we know to a certain extent what we're going to get from Khris on the court. I think he handled the addition of Dame very well. I think his biggest thing with fans and just with him was like the ramp up process, the injuries, everything else. So, you know, in your heart of hearts, what do you think for Khris next year? Can he play more than the 55 games?
I mean, I do think more. I will say, though, even if it is slightly less, as long as it's not 25 games, 30 games, I mean, the more the better, because you get the continuity down, you get everything it just makes everything a little bit easier and better. But if he's playing 50 games, I'm not going to lose my mind as long as he's ready for the playoffs, as long as he's performing in the playoffs. Like, I'm okay with that. Now, again, that's not ideal. That's not, like, I obviously want him to play probably closer to 65, you know, and be out there a lot and be out there consistently, not have any major injuries or setbacks. But, and if I was guessing, yeah, I'd put the number around like 60, 65. So I do think he'll play more, but it's one of those things where I kind of, again, it's another thing where I tell people, I'm just like, even if he misses a decent chunk of the season and has another maybe, you know, month where he misses some games, to me, that's not, I'm not like, oh my God, they have to move on from him. And that's it. It's like, no, we have Khris Middleton for the playoffs mainly. And the regular season, yes, it's good for getting ready for the playoffs. But at the end of the day, if he's healthy, performing in the playoffs, that's what you have him here for. You can say that about, you know, almost every guy on their roster pretty much. But, to me, it's just, I don't care as much as I think some other people do. And I won't panic if he does have an injury, a small one, or as long as it's nothing major, as some other people might if he does have one during the season. Because to me, it's just like, that's okay, you know, as long as he's ready for when it matters. Yeah,
I mean, the two injury, I mean, the ramp up was the one thing. And I think even if he plays around the same games, if he could play more minutes, and that would still be a net win, I think, because of course they were so careful with him and it worked. I mean, I think he got into a great form, and when he was healthy, he looked great. His injuries were so random, right? I mean, He landed on two guys were under him when he came down, and he rolled ankles. I mean, there's no player outside of like peak LeBron or I guess younger Giannis as well would roll those off. But, you know, there's very few players who that's not going to hurt them. Like, that's just kind of, that happens to all basketball players, all athletes. So I agree, though. I'm going to guess low 60s because it'll be interesting to see. I wouldn't be mad if they still continue to hold him out of back-to-backs. I think that's 16 games from the jump. So that would be like 66, and then, you know, bumps and bruises. But around 60 and significantly more minutes if he's not doing this ramp up, I'm totally fine with that. We'll see, but I agree with you. Like, it's great to have him. The continuity is really important. Like, I hope, maybe if they can be strategic with, okay, Khris isn't playing, this is a good time for a Dame rest game or a Giannis rest game as well to kind of bunk those together and just let the young guys play more. I have no issue with that either, to kind of keep them together as much as possible. But also, I think to a certain extent, Khris is pretty plug and play. You know what he does. You know what he's going to add. So I don't think it's a huge deal. Again, as long as it's not like he's back to 30 again and you don't know when he's that's the disaster. If he's like high 50s, low 60s, I think you can totally live with that.
Yeah. And I actually do underestimate how many back-to-backs they have. So like you said,
I know. I mean, that's the difficult part.
Because I completely agree. I'd like to probably sit in back-to-backs. Like, I just don't see the big point of doing it.
They're not in the playoffs. So they're not prepping for anything important with those.
So if you sit them all the back-to-backs, that's already 16 you're missing. I mean, and again, I'm not going to be mad if he does miss 10 games with an injury. So at that point, you're already back to what he was last year. And again, to me, that's fine. Like, I'm like, if it's not some huge extended thing that is completely, throwing off the whole rhythm of the team and is just a nagging on thing that keeps holding him out. I think it's something that you just kind of have to, not freak out too much over and just roll with it and say, hey, as long as he's good to go when it matters.
Yeah. Agreed there. I still think it's a luxury to have him as your third best player at this point, and you just got to roll with it. Where do you want to go from here? Who do you have fourth on the totem pole?
Let's go Brook.
Love it. There's so many different ways we can go with Brook. I think we've done the trade thing enough. We're not going to go into trades. Do you think we'll see more zone or other coverages than just drop with Brook Lopez? And I asked this because I think as the Bucks went on, Indiana was a tough matchup for him, but I do feel like under Doc and the defensive staff there, they got a little more creative with Brook. They weren't, doing the full Adrian Griffin, having him go out to the perimeter and try and survive out there, which we, in our last pod last week, listen if you haven't, by the way, with Jim Ozarski of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, was very generous with his time. We dropped it on Friday. That's why I'm giving the extra plug. If you missed it because you were having a life, unlike me sitting here watching WNBA basketball and getting ready for the Bucks, go check out that pod. But talked about kind of, maybe it wasn't Brook failing. It was like everyone else not being able to get back to the rim. But anyway, do you think they're going to try and mix it up and do a little more with him this season? Or just, I guess, what do you expect to see from Brook on the defensive end after, I think a lot of people would say he had a down year, even if the numbers overall were actually still pretty strong if you look at the rim protection metrics?
Yeah, I've talked a lot about how I think Brook has been kind of scapegoated for the defense. Now, I'm not saying he didn't have anything to do with, them struggling at times and in the playoffs, getting, the speed being a problem for them. I understand he's slow. He has limitations. I get that. But to me, you look at the numbers, obviously numbers don't always tell the whole story, but when you look at like the on-off stuff, the impact stuff, he was still really, really good. This wasn't just like, oh, he was okay. He was like 90th percentile in, defensive rating when on the court and on-off stuff. And, as you said, rim protection metrics. There's just so much that you're like, he still is very valuable on that end of the court. And I think a lot of what kind of made him look worse last season was, the scheme they ran in the first half was way too aggressive, and it really just allowed constant blow-bys. And then it's kind of Brook just being left on his own and he just asked to do more than he really should be asked to do and cover more ground than he really should be asked to cover. So yes, he's going to look worse in that scenario. Then in the second half, you have injuries to, several of the main guys just constantly. And then that's going to even make things worse. Then in the playoffs, you have Giannis get hurt. And when Brook's out there without Giannis, yes, that is going to drastically impact how good he is on that end, because you don't have that roamer alongside you. You don't have anyone else really back there to protect the rim with you. And so for me, I just am like, if they're healthy and now they have at least a few better perimeter defenders, they're not going to be some great perimeter defensive team, but they have at least they're capable on that end. I really think Brook's going to go back to being like looking better and not being exposed quite as much and not being someone that jumps out on the screen as much as like, wow, he's getting exposed right now. Because I feel like that happened several games last year where it just looked so bad and everyone noticed it and it gets everyone's attention. And I think it's one of those things where you notice the bad games with him way more than you notice the good games on defense. When he's struggling, it's like apparent and everyone sees it and it's, oh my goodness. When he's doing his job, it's kind of just like, okay, he's protecting the rim well and guys are missing, but you kind of just, that's what you expect from him. So I've always been like, I think his defense has been underrated recently. And I think going to having better perimeter defenders, switching it up a little bit. I like that Doc is willing to, Adrian Griffin was too, but I like that Doc's willing to go to zone a little bit, change it up, and not consistently just run the same exact thing over and over. But at the same time too, I don't mind, people hate on the drop defense, but it's fine as a staple of your defense. Like as long as it's not something you are tied to and you cannot do anything else, it's fine. Run that as your staple, use Brook in that mainly. And that's where he's best. When you need to go to other stuff, you can I've been wanting them to try to get players that allow you to play Brook a little bit less and go with Giannis maybe at the 5 a little bit more and have someone you can put in that 4 slot maybe, so that you are allowed to play Brook less and run some different things. I don't know if you're going to be able to run a ton of different stuff when Brook's on the court, just because, yes, he is limited. There's not a ton of other defensive schemes I think he would thrive in other than drop. But I do think that he's still impactful when he's out there. And I think having better personnel now allows you to possibly go away from Brook just a little bit more and have more flexibility of what you can do on defense.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people skip to like, oh, Brook is going to get played off the court or whatever it may be. And I think in almost every matchup, he's able to play at least a solid rotation of minutes. Like even like he was awesome against Boston last year. I know people will chalk that up to small sample. He played really well. And I also think, and I've maintained this for most of this, like the Bucks being really good run, if you can't play him off the court, like if you can't get the Bucks out of their drop, I think they're almost unbeatable in a 7-game series. Like I think people skip to it being like a thing. If they're comfortable on defense and Brook and Giannis are allowed to be at the rim, they're just so hard to beat. And I think, and if they're moderately healthy, right? Obviously there's exceptions to that. But if those two guys are playing and the rest of the team is healthy, I think they're such a bear. And I think that's such an underrated thing of like, teams need to probably be flexible with their own lineups to do that, or Milwaukee's defense is just going to be way too hard to stop. And if their defense is really good on this version of the team with Damian Giannis on the other end and Khris, everyone else, then it's like, okay, how do we beat them on either end? So yeah, I agree. I think Brook has been underrated. This is the scenario I've thrown out. If the last day of the season goes differently and they match up with Orlando, I think Brook's perception by the fans is totally different because he's such a better fit for that series against John Isaac and Wendell Carter and those guys versus the Flying Pacers. So yeah, definitely agree.
100%. And I mean, it's the combination of both going up against the team that he was probably the worst matchup for and not having Giannis. And it's like, what did you expect? Did you expect him to thrive in this series? Like, and as you said, people are going to remember people are going to remember the end of the season. People are going to remember how he looked in the playoffs. And rightfully so, I get that, but there has to be context applied. I still think the 82 game sample is far more indicative than that 6-game sample where, again, those two things, it was the worst matchup plus no Giannis. I'm looking at the 82 game sample, looking at how him, Dame, Giannis, and Khris had a, 98th percentile offense, 98th percentile defense, 99th percentile net rating. It was
it's best awesome. In the league above like 200 minutes or whatever it was.
Yeah,
and that gets overlooked a lot. They were incredible with all the issues that team had.
Yeah, like that core works and that core was awesome. And I think the Bucks knew that too, is like this top 4 does work. We're not going to go out trying to split this thing up. Obviously Brook's not untouchable, but it's like, I'm not out there trying to trade him. There guys like Brook Lopez don't grow on trees, and guys that fit alongside Giannis that well at center don't grow on trees at all. So yeah, I do expect him to have a better year on the defensive end and not to get, I just think people next year will be like, oh, wow, I think maybe we ridiculed Brook a little bit too much. Maybe he wasn't as big of a problem as we thought.
Taking a brief time out here to say time in on the action on Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with more than 5 million active members. We are just about in September. We're so close. And did you know every week in September, it takes one Caleb Williams passing yard to get you one win on Prize Picks. Only 1 yard gets an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Do not miss this deal on Prize Picks because it is gone when September ends. You can include the Caleb Williams 1 passing yard on your plays to win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks. the best way to get in on the action in most states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and of course, Wisconsin. It is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy. So if a player gets injured in the first half and doesn't return, you can get your picks remaining live, which is a huge deal. Right now on Prize Picks, football's coming up. I can't wait. I'm excited. I will be taking advantage of the Caleb Williams offer. Playing a lot of women's basketball. Angel Reese rebounds actually did let me down tonight as I'm recording this, but that's okay. Angel still having a tremendous season. A lot of Caitlin Clark points and assists. Dejanay Carrington points has been a sneaky one for me. Camila Cardoso points and rebounds, by the way, has been electric as well. I've had some nice successes later. You can join me and get ready for football coming back and then basketball coming back after. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code EuroStep and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code EuroStep on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Folks, speaking of cash, do you want a chance to win $500? Of course you do. Go to bluewirepods.com/survey. Blue Wire, our great corporate overlords, mine in particular, is running a survey across our network of shows, their network of shows, both to give better advertising experiences for audiences. And with the Blue Wire, will be giving away 2 $500 gift cards to those who participate in the survey. All you have to do is complete the whole survey, including your name and email, so that they can get in touch with you. Your responses and data will be de-identified. You will not be added to mailing lists, but you will help Eurostep Podcast Network, and Blue Wire with really important stuff going forward. We really appreciate everyone who takes part in this. Make sure to include that you heard about the Blue Wire survey from the Eurostep. We very much appreciate that. Again, that is bluewirepods.com/survey to be directed directly to that survey. It should only take a few minutes, just a few questions about yourself, your habits, etc. So check it out, bluewirepods.com/survey. Thank you very much. Back to the podcast. Yeah, I mean, I think to the point about just like centers, look at the Pelicans right now. I mean, I would not want the Milwaukee Bucks to be coming into the year and you're either starting a rookie who is incredibly unpolished offensively and Yves Missy, and just a rookie center, you just don't know how they're going to look, or Daniel Tice, who I like as a backup. Yeah. I would not feel good about him starting. I think there are some people who are like, oh, you just start Tice, doesn't matter. Like, it matters. It matters quite a bit. I assume you're going to have Gary Trent Jr. as the fifth most important player on the Bucks, or as the fifth starter. Or do you have someone else there?
Gary Trent. Let's go with it.
Another kind of weird question. Do you think Gary Trent Jr.'s offense or defense will be more important to this Milwaukee Bucks team? I ask this because I think obviously he's a better offensive player. The Bucks need the defense more. So is it going to be equal amounts, or do you think one end or the other will prove more helpful to the Bucks this coming season?
That's a fantastic question. I will say defense for the reason you just said, just in that we need the defense more. We need at least some defense in that spot. Now, is he going to be a better defensive player than offensive player? No. But I think him being an average-ish defender will have more of an impact than being a good shooter. And he's going to be a really good shooter, and that will have an impact. But I think you could get several guys that are good shooters in that spot, but getting a guy that's a good shooter plus being at least capable on the defensive end and not being Malik Beasley, not being, those guys that we had last year, I think that will show more on in terms of impact and will have a bigger impact on how this team ends up doing. And come playoff time, I think that will have a much bigger impact on their outlook. And again, we're not asking him to be all defense. We're not asking him to be great. We're just asking for him to be a decent, solid defender that, can stay in front of his man at least a little bit. And we know he's going to get some steals. That's kind of what he's been known for, is he generates deflections. He kind of just makes his presence felt on that end, which is good. Cause again, that's another thing we've needed. Bucks, yeah. I think we were dead last, I think, in forcing turnovers last year.
And they're really bad in transition offense too, which it blows everyone's minds when they read it, because obviously it's a Giannis team, but yeah, they've not gotten running enough, and no one's been there to run with him either. Yeah.
So I think him forcing some turnovers that they will need, and, like you say, getting on in transition, I think that will ultimately have the bigger impact. Now, again, he will be the better player on offense because I think his shooting is very underrated, I think. When you look at like the catch and shoot numbers, like on open catch and shoot threes, he was, I believe, number one in the entire NBA last year on open catch and shoot threes, according to Synergy. It was either one or two, and it was him and Steph. Like they were one and two, so pretty good company. But I just know, like, yeah, he's a guy that's going to knock down his open threes, which, you know, like I said, that's not abnormal for I mean, I know in the playoffs it can be abnormal for the Bucks, but it's not abnormal for the Bucks to get a guy that can shoot threes in that shooting guard position, but it will be abnormal for them to have a guy that can do that and then also be decent on the defensive end. So
yeah, if he can be like a little bit above league average, I think he can probably even be better than that, but around there and force the turnovers, I think that can be such a massive advantage to where, you know, Malik Beasley, bless his heart, tried to be that, but just was more limited on both ends, but certainly on the defensive end. I think I agree. I think it's actually pretty close because I'm really excited to see how he morphs his game to fit on this team, how much he does focus on defense versus offense, because he's a more complete scorer than any of these, like the Grayson Allen, the Malik Beasley types that the Bucks have trotted out. And they've been good players. They filled their roles. They've gotten raises, you know, in subsequent years. Trent is like able to score off the dribble more and really do stuff with the ball in ways those guys can't. So I really can't wait to see like how much of that does he still do? How much does that help the team? I mean, we talked about the Giannis actions earlier, whether it's Brook or like you have a fifth spacer out there, knowing you'll probably have on one wing Khris Middleton, on the other Gary Trent. That's just an insane, potent offensive setup. And I, again, just cannot wait to watch this team play.
Yeah, he's a much more dynamic scorer, and I'm actually looking if I have a tweet on it. I don't know if I tweeted something about it, but I remember looking earlier in the offseason at him in like his mid-range, and I was like, he actually makes a lot of mid-range shots and like off the dribble stuff. You know, I know he's not totally like an ISO scorer type of guy, but it's like he can step in, hit some shots compared to, again, I feel like you said, the Grayson Allens, the Pat Connaughtons, the Malik Beasleys were more just stationary, that was our big problem with mainly Grayson Allen was like, yes, he's a good shooter, but he needs the ball right here and he needs to be open and he needs to have room. And it's like, and that's hard to be successful in the playoffs. You got to be more dynamic. You got to be someone who can just give you a little bit more than that and be more than just a one trick pony. And I think, yeah, him being able to step in, hit some mid ranges, hit a little bit off the dribble, finish a little bit. Like I think he's definitely got, you know, a little bit more offensive pop than those guys do. It's still crazy that we got him on a minimum, but
it's nuts.
Yeah, I mean, now you're kind of talking to me into saying offense, but I'm still going to say
defense. Yeah, that's fair. I'm not going to say a negative word about Grayson. I saw that recent video. He's absolutely yoked. So good on you, Grayson. Congrats on the contract. This is now gets interesting. Who do you think who's the most important Bucks bench player this season?
Okay, so I'm a known Bobby Portis. I don't want to say hater because I don't hate
the Bobby Portis fans are not going to be. I should have worn my underdog shirt because my Bobby Portis question is not that positive either.
Yeah, I'm not a big Bobby Portis guy. Again, I like their bench pickups. I will say for this season, this is tough, but I will probably say Delon Wright because of the defense. Because of the defense.
Wow, that, you know, it's funny. The question I actually had is, will he end up being the most important Bucks bench player because of the versatility? And I think my excitement with him versus all these other backup point guards that were available, and many are getting the minimum, and even a guy like Fultz, which Rohan and I theory crafted, like, could he become like a Bruce Brown kind of player with the Bucks? I think maybe he could have. It's also like a huge reach. He's never played like that in his career. But, you know, Tyus Jones or Monty Morris or those guys, I don't like any of those players playing with Dame that much. Fultz for a different reason. Those other guys are just too small. But right, you're like, okay, yeah, I mean, who's the first signing? I remember back then it was like, it's great if they can sign other players and push them to the bench. He could compete for a starting job, though. Like, I don't think it's ideal, but he could because he can play with Dame, but he can play without Dame. He's very low turnovers. He forces turnovers on the other end. I think his shot is a question mark. He looked great with Miami, but it was a small sample. But I guess why do you think he's going to be the most important Bucks player? Is it just for the synergy with and without Dame, or what entices you so much about Delon Wright?
Yeah, I mean, you already hit on some of it, but the versatility and just how he fits with Dame and again, we saw last year the main thing was perimeter defense and guard defense mainly, and to have somebody that can not only back up Dame and be a backup point guard, which the Bucks have always needed, is like just a steady backup point guard, but someone who can also defend, possibly, as you said, play the two alongside Dame, even become maybe a starter if down the road we're saying, hey, we really need defense in the starting lineup and we can move Gary Trent to the bench. If Delon is, showing to be that much better of a defender, he could possibly play the two. And he was second in steals per 36 last year behind only Matisse Thybulle. So he's another guy that will force turnovers, as we said. Him and Gary Trent, I think that's probably another thing the Bucks were looking at specifically was, hey, we were dead last in turnovers forced last year. Like, let's get a couple guys that can force some steals. But I think also, like, Delon's not going to be a guy that his offensive stats jump off the page at you. Like, you're not going to look and see him averaging 15 points a game. But I just think on offense, as good as he's going to be on defense for us, I think offensively he will still be that, like, steady backup point guard, ball handler that you really want in a backup point guard for the Bucks, and that they've always been kind of looking for. And they've gotten different variations of it, but neither, like, the campaigns and, obviously DJ Augustine didn't work out, and Patrick Beverley and those guys. It's like those guys you were hoping could be guys that, okay, they can do a little bit offensively, run the show a little bit, and also play defense. But most of them could only do one or the other. I already mentioned, Delon's a great steals guy, great defender. But another thing I had said about him was 46% on catch and shoot threes last season, 119 assists to 14 turnovers.
So the 14 number is crazy.
And it's like, that's exactly what you need. Just a guy that's not going to make big mistakes with the ball in his hands, and then a guy that's going to play some solid defense. And again, for a minimum, absolutely great signing. And I just think in terms of impact, not in terms of statistics, and we're not going to, like I said, not going to look at the stats and say, oh my goodness, Delon Wright's having an amazing season. But I think people who consistently watch the team and watch the games will say, this guy makes as big of an impact as anyone off the bench.
Yeah, I think I like the take. I'm not all the way there, but I'm close to there with him being the most important off the bench. But I think, you're making a great case. And I think Rohan has made a similar case of, like, the specific things that he does are just going to be so important. For me, it's if he can be the best Bucks backup point guard since the, like, first George Hill stint, then, or if he can even approach that player. Because I think George Hill was the best, but I think he obviously didn't get to play with a Dame or even a Drew that first stint. He basically, he was the best point guard on the roster in the playoffs, right? When he was there with Bledsoe. If he can, if Wright can be anywhere close to that, just like the calming presence the Bucks have needed, while adding that defensive, that defensive acumen, that would be huge. So very excited for him. I agree. That's probably the best backup point guard they could have gotten from, like, anyone who was signed who went for any sort of really, there weren't that many that moved. He might have just been the best possible backup point guard option on the market this summer. Unless I'm just forgetting someone, but, like, I'd rather have him than, like, a Russell Westbrook or Reggie Jackson or someone like that. No question. Sorry, Russ and Bobby fans aren't happy. Okay, who is next after Delon Wright?
Next up, okay, again, I might get ridiculed for putting this guy above Bobby Portis, but I think Taurean Prince.
Yep, I agree. My question with Taurean Prince is, will he, like Malik Beasley before him, have a career best three-point shooting season on this great Bucks team with all the talent? For context, Prince's career high is exactly, I believe, on the dot, 40.0%. He's been close to it, high 30s many times, but that is his career high. Beasley, I think, had maybe one other season around 40%, but was above it, I think around 41% with the Bucks. And really just on that, like, how well do you see him fitting and being able to play that role here as, really a spacing wing in its simplest form?
Yeah, I think, as you said, a lot of guys come here and have near career years or career years. I think he'll be one of those guys. I think he definitely will be, if he's not above his career, or career high, he will be right at it. He'll be, I think, right around 40%, which you can always use on a team with Giannis. He's just a guy that can make threes. And one of my favorite things about this signing was, like, and he doesn't fit this perfectly, but for several years now, it's been, okay, who can you get that allows you to play Giannis at the 5 more? And
that was going to be my second question about him, so I'm glad you got into this. Go ahead.
Go small ball a little bit and have someone that you can put with Giannis at the 5 that can play some defense at the 4 and I always was like, okay, it's probably going to be like a 6'6", 6'7" dude that can play, again, play up, play the 4. has a little bit of toughness, defensive versatility. And again, I know he's not ideal as a 4, but like he can play the 4. I mean, I was looking at Cleaning the Glass, and they do like positional estimates each season based on like how many minutes they think each player played at each position, based on the lineups they were in. And the 3 previous seasons before last season. So last season, he only played 9% of his minutes at power forward with the Lakers, or estimated to be at power forward. But the 3 seasons before that, he played nearly 70% of his minutes at power forward. And that like, so he can play power forward. He is capable of playing power forward when needed. Now, again, it's not going to be a full-time thing, but if the Bucks want to go late in games or at any time with a more versatile defensive lineup, a more switch-heavy defensive lineup, they can throw Giannis at the 5, and they're not they're not screwed. They're not like, oh my gosh, we don't have anyone else to play here, as they kind of were last year. Like last year, they just didn't have that player. Even 2 years ago, they just didn't really have that player to put in that spot. It's what really helped them win a title was they got PJ Tucker, which allowed them to go with the, Drew, Khris, PJ, Giannis, and then you throw Pat Connaughton in there when Pat Connaughton was good on defense. And that lineup helped them, win a title. And so I'm very much looking forward to seeing how he kind of changes the defensive lineups that are thrown out there and his versatility. I love that he can play, the 3 mainly, but a little bit of 4, a little bit of 2 even maybe, when needed. And so, yeah, his shooting is going to be great, but I'm really looking forward to him as like a small ball 4, seeing if it does unlock more Giannis at the 5 and more switchability and all that. And I kind of mentioned earlier with Brook, like I've been trying to find that player that lets you play Brook a little bit less. I don't think you have to completely get rid of Brook, but you want the flexibility to not have to be forced to play him 35 minutes a night, because there's going to be games where you don't want to play him 35 minutes a night. Having a guy like Taurean Prince gives you an option of, hey, if we want to play Brook only 15 minutes, we can give those minutes to Taurean Prince, a little bit more Giannis at the 5, gives you more flexibility. It just opens up your options a lot. So that was, again, when they signed him, that was my first thought was, okay, like we just unlocked some versatility, which that was the big problem last year was our bench guys had no versatility. Everyone was kind of just, you're in this spot, you can't play much up or down, and you're kind of just locked into that spot. They now have a little bit of versatility.
Yeah, I think what I've been putting out there, and I won't belabor the point, so I'm sure the listeners have heard many times, but like, can Prince and Khris be like 3.5s together? If neither of them is a true stretch 4, like they're both, I think they have good size, at least for 3s. I think Khris certainly like size and strength wise probably skews more toward the 4 at this point. So, but it can't do all the things that you need because he does a lot offensively as well. So I think so. I'm excited to see it. But I'm glad at least they have a better option than Jay Crowder, who just clearly was not going to work. Had a great start to last season. I think the injury derailed him, and now I think he's unsigned. So kind of shows, I guess, where his value was at. Okay, does the Bobby Portis slide continue, or does it stop here? I think there's one other place you could go, and I'm interested to see if you do it.
Okay, I won't do it. I'll go with Bobby next, because I do with this team. You can clearly see his role. You can clearly like it is. Last year it was a little bit like, okay, I don't know how he completely fits on this team, and me personally, I still would prefer he's traded if they can find a good deal and they can at some point, trade him for, again, a more versatile defender. And but I see his role. I understand what he's going to do this season, so we'll go with Bobby.
Yeah, so that's pretty much the question. You kind of beat me to it. Will he find a lane with Doc and this new coaching staff? I do feel like watching last season, he didn't fit as well. I think he fit better on the Drew version of the Bucks when they needed more offense and they needed more players to create for themselves. I think that's the beauty of these additions is like you can see them all scoring off the ball, right? Like they can be so beneficial helping other actions, whereas Bobby, really, that has not been the case as much. So whether it's like more dunker spot offense, finally picking like screening and rolling more, which he really has not done a ton as a Buck, and defensively just like finding some sort of coverage, right, that he can excel at. He did the trapping last year. I personally am not a fan of that. Maybe they can make it work now with better personnel around him, but like, is there a lane he can find? Because I agree. I think right now it makes more sense. It's cleaner. Like, can we swap him out for X defensive big, right? Is that, it would make a lot of sense. Someone who can just come in and, maybe be like a rim running and defender who doesn't play a bunch with Giannis, but can be the backup center, just give you a different look there. That hasn't happened yet. Maybe it happens by February. We'll see, until it does, or if it does, like how can Bobby find something to fit a little better with his team than just like, all right, dump it back down to him and everyone stands around and watches for a bit.
Yeah. And he's going, in my opinion, he's going to need to find that, or else, like, again, he's just going to probably be even more on the trade block than he has been, because I think that's been the big issue is you look at it and say, okay, in terms of fit with this core and with Dame and Giannis, again, I know I'm sounding like a huge Bobby hate here, but there's not a much worse fit around Dame and Giannis than a guy who is a ball stopper offensively and plays almost no defense. And that's just not a good combination to have. And so, he's going to have to figure out other ways to be impactful offensively other than just post ups and just having the ball in his hands constantly. As you said, I think it's like trying to be more of a screener roller type of player. Just improving overall, I think his passing a little bit and just his willingness to pass a little bit. And I think he got better as the season went along. There were times late in the season where I was like, hey, Bobby actually made a decent pass out of that post up, which in the beginning of the season, he didn't make any passes out of post up. So it was like, okay, I saw progression there. On the defensive end, as you said, they did a lot of that trapping and getting aggressive with him, and wasn't a big fan of that just because he can't move that well, and he's just too slow to get all the way back down into the paint. I think he's always going to be limited on that end personally. And that's, again, one of the reasons I'm just very down on him is I just don't believe in the defense. But for me, I understand that he's going to be needed as a big man backup, as someone who, when Brook's out, they're not going to go with Giannis at the 5 a ton. They don't really have any other backup center. So it's okay. We basically, Bobby, you've got to give us at least, probably 13, 15 minutes. Probably he's going to get more than that, I think. Because I believe he's kind of a Doc guy. I think Doc likes him. I think Doc wants to play him. Even though it wouldn't be my preference, but I do think, he's going to be needed as someone who can, and the main thing is going to provide rebounding. The Bucks are going to need his rebounding when Brook goes out of the game, or if Giannis is out of the game, or possibly both. There's sometimes where they just have Bobby out there. So his rebounding is going to be needed. I expect him to be better on the defensive end, but I think he can be a little bit more of a winning player on the offensive end. He's always going to be score first, but I think he can, tap into some other things rather than just always needing the ball in his hands. So, again, I ideally would like to see him moved at some point if things don't change drastically, but, you can clearly see where, like, his fit on this team. You can clearly see his role is going to be, we need you as a backup big, because after Brook, there's very little there, because you're just not going to play Giannis at that position a ton.
Yeah, I agree. I think offensively, like, can he get his shot back to a certain extent? Like, will he take them? He kind of got shot hesitant by the end of the year. Like, will he just stop working with lethal shooter and shooting basketballs through like cannons? Like, just shoot on NBA rims. That's what we really need. And defensively, it's just like, what can they do? Because I don't like the trapping. He cannot drop. I think we learned that lesson. I don't want to see that experiment again. Like, can you just switch more with him or zone or something that you can do? Like, I think switching over the last like 3 years has probably been his best defensive coverage. I think that's when he's been at his best. And then kind of you can lean him more on like Giannis or the other guys playing with him to pick up. You obviously now don't have Drew, who picked up a lot for everyone all the time. But, it is what it is. You got to live with that move. And I think Bucks fans should be fine with that move at this point, even after the finals. That's a whole other can of worms. But yeah, I think he has to as well. I agree. Will he? We'll see. I think Bobby's been very adamant of like, I'm playing Bobby like I'm great, like I'm this post player, everything else, which, NBA players should be confident in their skills, but I think he's going to have to be more malleable, or I don't think he's going to, be a Buck long term, because it's just not going to be tenable if he's going to continue to demand post ups with this team and this personnel.
Yeah, completely agree.
Guessing we're going AJ Green here, and I'm assuming. I think this is kind of the end of like the guys I feel confident in that will be rotation players. Do you agree with that before we get to AJ Green in particular, or do you the other young guys or Pat? Do you see one where you're like, oh, I think he will play too?
Ajax is close, but I can't quite get there until I see more consistency in terms of like his defensive what's it called? Not awareness, but
Yeah,
I
just
can't think of the
not
word.
fouling a
Yeah,
bunch.
yeah. Discipline. That's what I meant to say.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's
His defensive discipline. Like that's the one thing where I'm like, okay, until I see that more consistently, until I see him able to, like, obviously he has games. He's great. He makes a huge impact. That Warriors game was awesome.
Yeah.
And you have moments like that where it's like this dude should play all the time. But then when you do start to play him almost, more consistently, you notice that like, okay, well, there's plenty of times where he's actually hurting the team because he's, undisciplined. So he's intriguing. I'm sure, we'll talk about him a little bit, but it's like, yeah, for me, he's not someone that I'm putting in there right away as like he needs to play in the rotation. I need to see it first. Whereas I think I have seen enough from AJ Green that I'm like, okay, yes, he should play. I think he's got more of a path to play. I think that I'm more confident having him out there than I am with Ajax as of right now. Now that obviously could change.
What skill outside of his shooting have you been most impressed with AJ Green? Because I think defense comes to mind early. I just want to throw in there before I let you answer. I thought he had some incredible aware passes down the end of the season and in the playoffs where I think it took me even more by surprise. I thought he'd be an okay defender. He was better than I expected there. Like some of the leveraging his gravity to make the pass, it kind of blew me away. I agree with you. I think AJ Green is a clear cut above. I think that's why he did not go to Summer League. I think, frankly, the Bucks were like, yeah, you have nothing to prove. Like you would help. Maybe they should have sent him just to help that team. They really could have used him. But I think he will play. I think he is pretty locked in. But what besides the shooting, which is kind of a given, has impressed you the most?
For me, it has since the last season, it's been his ability just to stay in front. And I honestly think he might be the best player. Probably not anymore now that we have like Delon Wright and whatever. But last season, he always would stay in front of his guy. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to stop them. They could still score over him. But he made it tough. He just moved his feet extremely well. And I just was so impressed by that because nobody else on the team could really do it. Guys were constantly getting blown by, and it was like, it just felt like nobody could contain their guy. It was always just like, okay, they'll get by us. We have to hope that we can recover well enough. And with AJ, it was like, he'd be going against, there was like Jamal Murray in a game where he had multiple possessions where he's just like bodying up, staying in front of him, making him shoot over him and shooting a tough shot. And
I think even Maxey in one of those later Sixers games
for sure.
Had some really good possessions. And it's just like, how is that even possible?
Yes, I remember I was in Vegas for that game and I'm sitting there like going crazy about AJ Green's defense. And I'm in Vegas and I'm focused on AJ Green's defense right now. But it was, I totally remember that. Cause Maxey, he had a really, really good game against him. And like, that's one of the quickest dudes in the league. And you're able to stay in front. You're not going to stop these guys from scoring all the time. But just his ability to make things tough, stay in front of his guy is something that they just don't have from a ton of other guys. And so that's been the thing that's definitely popped out to me the most. And, but the passing definitely is underrated too. I think that goes under the radar.
Yeah. I'm excited to watch him this year and see, like, is there another step? I mean, a guy who clearly works very hard on his game and like, what else can he show? If he just refines these things, that's fine, but maybe there's more too.
Yeah. And the only thing that like the one thing that gives me hesitation with him is just that he struggled in the playoffs. And so it's like, okay, I haven't seen it when it matters yet. And that is a big thing, obviously. Like that's ultimately what we need is guys that are going to be able to, they're 16 game players. They're guys in the playoffs. Yep. So yes, I still need to see that. And if he right away looks like an even better player and is taking, another little step and becoming more of a guy that looks like he'll be ready for the playoffs. I mean, he could very quickly go above Bobby on this for me. And again, I know it seems crazy that I'm going to have Bobby maybe at 9, but I just think that there's guys that will make more of an impact. And I think with AJ Green's defense combined with, again, his shooting, you said some of his passing, just overall his fit on this team, his ability to affect winning, I think he might move ahead of Bobby rather quickly if he can progress.
Yeah, I mean, I think if, development's not linear, but if he improves at all from last year, he's going to be really, really valuable to this team. Yeah. I think then the onus is on Bobby to show that he can be a better fit in, not fit out, to quote LeBron James. We can do Ajax next. It's funny. I think you kind of already answered it actually, and we could probably, maybe the bottom of the roster here. Maybe maybe we won't spend it. We'll see. There might be a good discussion here still. But if you had to pick one thing for Ajax to fix, which would it be? His jumper, which last regular season looked good. Summer League kind of scared me. His tendency to not look at the basket when he drives or when he has the ball, which absolutely drove me crazy last season. He would look at it on tip dunks, but just go dunk, man. There's no one around. Or the fouling, like the defensive discipline, which you already talked about. So I'm guessing it's that one. But if you had to pick one of those three for him to have fixed coming into the year, which is it?
Yeah, it is the defensive discipline. The not looking at the basket's funny because I remember noticing that too when he was at UConn. Was like, because I mean we watched him a lot. He's a Big East guy, and yes, he was like athletic, great passes, super high IQ, good defense. But it was like he just doesn't really look to score that often. And there's times where it's like, hey, you can score a little bit. I don't expect the shot to ever. The percentages weren't that bad last season.
It was fine. Yeah, it was like 36, 37. Like totally, if he's that forever, that's fine by me.
Yeah. But I don't expect it to be a consistent thing. His shots are gonna he's just not a shooter. He's gonna miss ugly sometimes. Like his misses usually are pretty bad. He'll go on some really bad stretches. He might get confident and hit a few in a row. So I kind of expect that to always be like that. If he does become like more of a consistent guy or more of a has a better looking shot, I'd be very surprised. And I don't but to me, that's not something like when they drafted him, I didn't think, he needs to develop a really good shot or else he's not going to be impactful. Like his impact is always going to, in my opinion, come from his passing ability, his IQ, and his defense. And the main one will have to be defense because of how limited he is offensively. But, and you can see clearly the potential there. We see the moments, as I talked about, he has games where he really pops off the screen with his speed, athleticism, and everything that the Bucks are looking for and really need. It's just a matter of getting the discipline down, honing it back a little bit, limiting the fouls. And so it's something that very easily could just come with age and could just come with experience and getting used to playing in the NBA level. And, so I definitely could see a world where, we watch him this season and we're like, wow, he's very much improved on that end in terms of his, not fouling as much, not being nearly as reckless, I guess, on the defensive end. So if that is the case and his jumper remains at that 36%-ish level and he still has, is making the same winning plays, yeah, he's going to find a spot to play. And it'll just be a matter of how high on the chart he can go. But to start off, yeah, we need to see that before I think we're all confident putting him out there because again, we just haven't seen it consistently.
Yeah, and I think my biggest reservation with him is still the Bucks pretty badly lost the minutes he played with Giannis last year, and it was a mess of a season. Like, I'm not writing him off forever for that, but I do think that makes sense stylistically based on his game and, providing few of the things that, really probably shooting is the big one, but just like offensive gravity either, right? Like he doesn't get to the rim with the ball either. He can just kind of be ignored, and that you just can't have that. You just can't have guys who play a lot with Giannis and they lose those. You have to win Giannis and Dame minutes. So that'll be something I watch closely. We'll see how much he plays. That's 10? Like that's already not a ton of minutes. It's a pretty loaded team. And there's some other young guys who will be vying for them as well. Who would you put next? So now we're kind of out of probably rotation. Now it's more of like, who do you think has the best shot to crack in and find some sort of a role if there's an injury, or if there is a trade or something like that?
Yeah, I do think it's still Pat, especially because, we saw Doc give him quite a few minutes last season. I know there were injuries and stuff, but I do think that Doc, knowing who he is, knowing how he coaches, he's going to trust the veteran and seeing him do it in the finals before, like that's going to give Pat a leg up on several of these guys that we probably think right away should be ahead of Pat and clear cut. Like there's not much of a debate there. Guys like AJ Green, like why should Pat play above AJ Green? To us, it doesn't make sense. But to an NBA coach, they're probably more comfortable putting out Pat Connaughton, who in their minds, I've seen him do it on the highest stage. He's done this for a long time. Again, most people are going to disagree. I disagree with it, but I would not be surprised if, we're in the season and Pat's playing more than people want him to. Not to say that Pat couldn't play a little bit better and he's just going to be terrible, but I don't see a world where Pat is an upgrade over AJ Green next year unless AJ Green really falls off. And to me, I think there's a better chance of him getting better than getting any worse. So I'm hoping that Pat isn't eating into these guys' minutes too much, especially again, given that it's regular season ball. We want to see AJ Green, Ajax develop more and just see what we've got in them, see if they're legit, see if again, we just want to see them become better players, or at least try to become better players, give them the opportunity. And, it just will be frustrating if Pat is kind of just playing like Pat Connaughton and doing the same things. And it's like, okay, we're giving this guy 15 to 20 minutes that could be going to other guys that have more potential and could help you more down the road. Pat is a little bit more of just like a little bit safer option, I guess. I mean, even though I don't think he's that safe anymore of an option, but he's a little bit safer option, but there's just no ceiling there anymore. I don't think that gives you some leg up or gives you some big boost, like there was in 2021 where he really was impactful. So he's the guy I definitely think, if I was predicting who would take minutes, yes, it's him. But it's just, I just hope that it's not too many. I hope it's not another case of like last year where we just everyone kind of grown seeing Pat Connaughton continue to get minutes over the younger guys when, as I said, it's regular season. You don't need to be winning every single game. You just, you want to see this team develop and grow a little bit.
Yeah, I think the question is, and I think the AJ Green overlap probably is the most difficult thing for Pat. I don't think there's many worlds where he should play over AJ, but the question I had is he a shooting resurgence away from jumping up at least like a spot on the list where you're like, okay, as much as I would like to see Andre Jackson Jr. more, like if Pat comes out, and I don't think this is impossible by any means, if he's just like a 39% 3-point shooter this year, the defense is obviously limited to a certain extent. I thought his ball handling and drives have improved a lot since he's become a Buck. I thought the ball handling last year, they pressed him into backup point guard duty, like between or when Pat Bev was out. He kind of did it okay. I mean, it's certainly not what you want going forward, and that's why you go get Delon Wright. But like ran the offense decently well. I think he does a lot of things at just a solid level. I think defense is probably one of the worst, but the shot hasn't fallen. I think that's when, if he's like mid-low 30s, then it's just hard to play him at all. I think his form still looks good. We've seen him hit high leverage shots. We've seen him be catch high, release high. I mean, could you see that happening? I mean, you said, you think he'll play. I agree. I think he'll have at least a shot to play. I think it's going to be competitive for him to play. But do you think there's a world where his shooting percentage is just up a few points and suddenly it's like, I kind of don't mind that he's playing to a certain extent, not over all the young guys, but you're like, okay, yeah, that rotation role makes sense for him.
Yeah, I could see that. And I mean, again, it would also depend, my happiness of him playing would depend on how other guys look. Like, again, we mentioned if AJ Green looks as good or better than he did before, even if Pat's shooting a little bit better, like I'm not going to want him playing over AJ Green. It would require Pat shooting, 38% and AJ Green falling a little bit and Andre Jackson not showing much. Like there'd be several things that have to fall into place for me to be like, I am happy with Pat Connaughton in the rotation right now. But no, I don't think it's not out of the realm of possibility that he goes back to being a 38% shooter. The last 2 years have been more in that 34% range. He's been there several times throughout his career. Like he's been streaky. He's been someone who can have seasons where he shoots 39 and then he has seasons where he shoots 33. And it's, it does kind of make or break how he's perceived by people and how he looks out there. Cause when he's not hitting his shots, it very much, you're kind of just like, okay, what are you giving us? And when he's making them, it's like, okay, we know why you're out here. This makes sense. Okay, Pat Connaughton's hitting his threes. But I could see him going up to the mid to higher 30s. Again, it just would depend on other factors, whether I'm even still willing to put him out there for a lot of minutes, or not a lot, but a decent chunk of minutes off the bench. Because again, if Ajax is looking better and on defense and everything, and AJ Green's looking as good as he was, there's just I'm not going to want to see a ton of Pat Connaughton.
Yeah, I think the really interesting thing with him, if he makes it through the deadline, like could he play a low minute role, look good in it, see the shooting tick up? And then I think if that all happens, which again, a couple of ifs there, I think he really lurks as a potential playoff kind of X factor deep in the rotation of like you mentioned earlier, and I agree, and I'm not writing him off by any means, but AJ Green didn't have a good playoff shooting the ball. I think he did other things. He didn't fall apart. It didn't look like the moment was too big, but his shot didn't fall. And then the value is just a lot lower. I think Pat, until last playoffs, like as bad as his regular season was the year before, played really well against Miami. So, and obviously, bangs in the finals, right? Like has these big moments and has been nails and one of like the 6 guys they could play against Brooklyn. So that's what I'll be more intrigued by almost, I think, than like the regular season. Although if he's still on the team, and we never know at the deadline, John Horst typically makes a move. Not many guys left to move. What can he show then? I'll be really intrigued to see. But I see why, no one's super excited about it. I think there could still be a valuable player in there for the Bucks at some point, even if it doesn't seem like it right now.
Yeah, the playoffs for me was what kept me like at just above water with him, where I was like, okay, I'm not giving up on this dude because we've seen him consistently. It was like from 2021 till through 2023, like he was really good in the playoffs. He just consistently shot the ball well, made big shots, and I was like, I trust him to make shots when it matters, and that's valuable. And last year was the first time where he struggled in the regular season, and then he also struggled in the playoffs, and I was kind of just like, okay, maybe it's done, maybe this is it. But before that, that was the thing that always just kept me positive with him, was like, I'd be like, even though he struggled last regular season, like you said, he was good against the Miami in that series. He was good in the Boston series. He was obviously great in 2021. So that was the one thing. And yes, I do think that is a possible thing where like, they could hold on to him and just look at it and say, hey, he's a good depth option to have. If you're going to go to a guy, a shooter, deep in your bench in the playoffs, you're going to a guy that's done it before. You're going to a guy that you have more trust than just throwing out someone who's never been there before. So I think going into it with possibly him and AJ Green, even though they are redundant, you say, hey, let's go into it with both of these guys. And if one of them is good, if one of them is hot in that playoff run, even just one at a time, like we will have someone that can play, that can be valuable and hit some shots for us. So you kind of just double your chances of having a good shooter out there. So
yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see if this rotation is the same. I mean, even just going into the regular season, but certainly in the playoffs, like this is one of their deeper teams. I feel there's going to be some tough calls for Doc to make. Next four players, I have no idea how you're going to order them. I can't wait. So the four players are, I'll read them in a random order so I don't bias you. AJ Johnson, MarJon Beauchamp, Chris Livingston, Tyler Smith. Who would you put next?
I'll put Chris Livingston.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Love Chris Livingston.
Yeah, I know you're a truther, so yes.
I didn't know if you. I was gonna not show my hand, but I couldn't help but celebrate. But you knew anyway. Do you think CL can grow into that kind of ideal platonic idea of a stretch four to play with Giannis within the next, we'll say, like 1 to 3 years? So assuming he's not there right now, which I think he might be closer than people think, but we'll put that aside. We're talking about 12th at this point, I think, in the rotation. Do you see that path for him being the physical, rebounding, stretchy enough player to put out there with Giannis?
It's not out of the realm of possibility. Now, with all four of these last guys, I'm like, if I'm betting, no, I don't think these guys are going to play any type of meaningful minutes anytime in the short term here. Obviously, we hope AJ Johnson can in a few years. We hope Tyler Smith develops into something, but I think Chris Livingston there's a possibility of it. Is the path there? Yes. It's just, it's too much of just like hope. It's too much of, I need to see it a little bit more. He's been pretty impressive when we've seen him on the court. He's been pretty impressive in summer league and everything. I think the build and the archetype is pretty good. It's just, I just haven't seen enough. And so I'm not willing to, but I'd rather have this than MarJon, where you've seen it and it's bad, than a guy that you haven't seen enough and you're like, okay, maybe there's a potential there. Like I could maybe see him, if he gets a little bit better and continues on an upward trajectory, yes, he could possibly get there. But I'm not I know there's some people, I mean, I don't know if you're one of these people, but like there's some people that really do believe like he should be playing, he should be in the rotation and stuff like that. I'm not there yet. I got to see more. Like I just have to, especially on a championship team, a pretty deep team. But to me, is it crazy to think that he could play minutes in the next, few years, like meaningful minutes? No. Based on what we've seen, like he's shown at least flashes. So I'll put, like, that's why I'm putting him above those other few guys, is that I think there's at least a sliver of a chance of him, sneaking in through the cracks to break the rotation.
I think he should not be guaranteed minutes. I think he should be strongly in the running for, I think, really that 10th spot. When I look at the Bucks, I think 1 through 9, if not the order, I think the players, I feel very strongly in who they should be. I think he should be like maybe, if not pole position, like near or at the top among the group of like Ajax, Pat C, and him, I think, vying for that last spot. I think there's really one spot up for grabs right now. And we'll see if he can do it or not. All I want, like for preseason and even early in the season, if possible, I want to see guys like him, like Ajax, certainly AJ Green, and maybe even MarJon and the rookies, probably less so them, like real minutes with the primaries. That's what matters, right? Like I want to see, like, can the passing and cutting of Chris Livingston, outweigh teams probably just ignoring him offensively, right? Like they're not going to care. Like, can he rebound well enough? Can he be big enough? Can his foot speed? Like, I want to see the minutes with the important players. So I'm hoping we get some of that. But yeah, I think he can, but I'm not like, he should play 20 minutes a night by any means. You got to earn that. And he has not done that yet. He hasn't had a ton of opportunities, but that's life on a really good team. All right. Who next?
I will reluctantly say MarJon Beauchamp.
Is his Bucks tenure basically over at this point, or is this one last real shot to kind of turn it around? Because
The Last Dance documentary. Are we getting a MarJon documentary after the season?
Let's check back in. I think, was it like 2 months? They have to decide on that 4th-year option.
Yeah.
I could guess right now how they're going to decide. It's before the season, so he can make them look silly for it if a lot of things go his way. But do you think there's to use your is there a realistic possibility that he does enough? Like, let's assume they decline the option at $5 million. They don't want it guaranteed. He hasn't shown much. I think some of these young players are supplanting him. Can he do enough this year, this low, kind of in the pecking order coming in, to like be a meaningful part of the Bucks going forward, or is he going to have to do like the Mamu, the Christian Wood, like go somewhere else where there's a real opportunity for him and get a fresh start?
Yeah, I just, this summer was when I was like, okay, and I've been down on MarJon literally since when they drafted him. Like, I just didn't love him as a prospect. I wanted to believe in him. I was rooting for him. Obviously, there were flashes early where you were like, okay, he could become something, but you just never saw it consistently enough. I just never saw enough that made me excited. And this summer was like when I was like, okay, I think it's officially pretty much over for him.
Yeah.
Because, just with how much he struggled in the summer league, literally after going out and saying, I don't belong here and I should be like, which I'm not saying that's a bad mindset to have, but when you say that, you got to be the best player on the court pretty much every time you're out there. And he was anything but that. He had like a couple of good quarters, but there was not enough there to warrant him being like some type of rotational player right away. So I think it's all but over for him. I'll put the chances above 0 that he could all of a sudden at least show enough to warrant some playing time, but I just don't see him becoming a part of the meaningful rotation. And I think now most people are seeing that. Most people are agreeing with that, because for a long time, rightfully so, like people were holding out hope and saying, I still believe in his potential and all that. But I think this summer is when people kind of looked at it and said, I just don't think he's that guy. He just doesn't have, he's a big confidence player for me. Like, he's someone where when he's playing with confidence, he looks so much better than when he's playing timid. And it just totally impacts his game. It's just his confidence level when he's out there. And I just, too often, even in the summer league, I just see him, not really wanting to dribble, not wanting to be aggressive. And then all of a sudden he'll have a quarter where he does look aggressive and he scores 12 points and then he goes back to being, timid. And I just, that's not going to be a guy that makes it super far in the NBA, at least in the short term. So I don't really see it. And I'm guessing that they'll move on relatively soon.
Yeah, I think, you have to be able to keep the confidence while not being on the ball a ton if you're going to be, anywhere a role player. There's not a team in the league at this point in the NBA that's going to be like, we have 20 touches a game for MarJon Beauchamp. It doesn't exist. The talent of established guys is just too strong. And I think that's his big issue, is he was not able to consistently do role player stuff at a high level. For the moment for me that ended it was, as his summer league has fallen apart, AJ Johnson, the rookie, was like kind of a more complete player and starts like calling MarJon up to screen for him. And like, I was just like, all right, that's it. That's done. Yeah. Like, I think, you're below guys that aren't supposed to be able to play for like 3 years. I think AJ Johnson, I think people were a little too low on him going in. I think he kind of flipped that with his summer league, but I agree. I there's always a chance, right? Anything could happen. Maybe he totally lights up camp. I have to imagine that whether they find a trade of somewhere who wants to take a shot at him, or he just kind of plays out the year. I see him here in Oshkosh some, and then after the end of the year, he's a free agent. I'm not sure which. I'd be pretty surprised if he was ever like a real rotation player at this point, which hopefully not on the Bucks. Hopefully he can go somewhere, at least be able to play more. and then kind of because I think it's just consistency with him. Like, as you said, his best moments have been great, but you have to be consistent in the NBA. So I hope he gets a chance to do that. I don't think it's going to be in Milwaukee, though.
And the role player stuff that you mentioned was a good point because, yeah, that was another thing this summer where he starts talking about how, having the ball in his hands and all this stuff. And it's like, no. Like you should be focused on playing like a role player and fitting into this team. Like that's how you're going to work your way up. And it seems like he's just got a little bit too much of like where he just wants the ball in his hands. He wants to be, a scorer. He wants to do that. And it's like, that's not how you're going to make this team and be successful on this team. Like, it's just not that. You got to fit in on this team and do what, when they drafted him, they're drafting him to be more of a role player type of player. And if you're not going to want to fit in that role, I mean, it's one thing if you can't even do those things, but if you don't even want to do those things, like you're not going to have any chance. So, he's got to first want to play like a role player and then start to, hone in on those role player skills, as you said. So,
yeah, it's probably the biggest difference between him and I'd say outside of AJ Johnson, every other one of the young guys is very much like I do this specific thing. Yeah. I focus, and it's so much easier to slot those guys in. Okay, A-double-J or Tyler Smith? We're down to two. Well, I won't make you do two ways.
Yeah, I'll go AJ Johnson. I just think that obviously, being the first round pick, he's going to be a little bit higher on the totem pole. I know he's probably neither one of them is that NBA ready though. If they had drafted someone that was significantly more NBA ready than AJ Johnson in the second round, I'd put that player above him. But I think they're both pretty much projects, and so I'll put AJ Johnson above him, and I'd rather give him minutes, give him some run, see how he looks against NBA talent. And we saw the flashes in the summer league. There were some really good flashes. His speed popped off the charts, his IQ popped off the charts, his confidence popped off the charts. Like all those things were really good signs, and I think at least giving him, some minutes here and there and seeing him in garbage time, whatever. I want to see that and just see like, okay, does he pop a little bit off the screen like he did in summer league? It's not going to be the same, obviously, being in the NBA level, but like, can you see the vision the way you did in the summer league still? So I think he's naturally kind of just a little bit above Tyler Smith in that he was the first round pick.
Yeah, I think you kind of hinted at it. My question, I think he's going to be mostly a herd player, some NBA minutes here and there. Like, what if you had to just pick one thing? And is it just like more of these exciting flashes against better talent, or is it like one specific skill or even physical trait you're looking at that you want to see? I think he's not going to be a rotation player by the end of year one in almost any world, but he's developmental. So what development are you looking for that you would think, in May, you're like, oh, AJ Johnson, did this or looked like this, with the herd and a little bit with the Bucks. I feel good about that going into year two.
Probably the finishing, because I think that's always naturally going to be a question mark when with someone his size. And I know he had some struggles in the summer league with it, where he'd get to the rim and have some nice moves, but he couldn't quite finish, finishing through contact and stuff. So That's probably what I'm looking at, because I think the main thing with him is we want to see that just physical progression from him, and I think you'll see that in his like finishing numbers, his ability to handle contact, and all of that. Because I totally believe that the feel for the game is there. I totally believe that the confidence is there. The mentality is there. Like I believe in that with him. It's just a matter of is he physically going to get to a point where he can handle the NBA, he can play in the NBA, he can succeed in the NBA. And so if I'm looking at one part of his game that would kind of reflect that, I think it would be that those finishing numbers and just his ability to handle contact, get to the rim. I mean, I believe he can get to the rim. It's just a matter of is he going to be crafty enough and strong enough to handle that stuff?
Yeah, I agree. I think just purely like adding a little bit of functional strength. I mean, more than a little bit. I think a little bit, you might not see it as much. Like he's a real skinny guy, right? I don't think he's ever going to be yoked. He's not going to have the 50 pounds of muscle that Giannis did, and nor should he. Like he's a twitchy ball handler. But I think for the finishing, as well as I think his shot would benefit from him just being stronger. I think I like his form. He can get to it quickly. It's a little weird, but I think it works for him. I think it looks good. It looks repeatable. I don't think he needs like a fixed shot, but like just more upper and lower body strength, I think would help that thing too. And that's going to be huge for him. If he ever reaches that lofty ceiling and is like an impactful guard, whether it's bench or starter, the shot is going to need to be there too. Forgiven, like he's never, I think, going to be an elite defender at that size. I'd be a little surprised. He can be good. I don't think he'll be game changing. Maybe. I mean, he's a little tall, but I think probably just too skinny. So that's the like functional strength, finish a little better, shoot a little better, stuff like that. It's going to be an uneven year, but I'm excited to watch him. And then we've got just Tyler Smith left. Hilarious report from Yahoo Sports that maybe if the Bucks trade Brook Lopez, he could be Milwaukee's starting five. I've said many times, no way in hell. Do you think he could ever defend the five? He is 6'10", 6'11", very athletic. I think more than I thought. He looked in summer league. Obviously can shoot. I think Rohan and I in this pod and other places have already kind of said he is some version of like a MPJ, Michael Porter Jr. player. I don't think he will ever be a stretch five. I think it's a different thing. And obviously not going to, he's not going to be for sure MPJ. That'd be an insane value if he was. But like that sort of, Channing Frye, like a spacer forward who with size. Do you think he could ever be more than that defensively? Or are you with us where it's kind of like, the shooting is there, the athleticism is there. Don't look for that much on defense and just let him be what he is.
Completely agree. And that's again, I don't mean to sound down on these guys, but that's the reason why I didn't love the pick is because again, my mind was on defense. My mind was on being versatile on that end. But obviously he's going to give you some good things on offense. Like you said, he's a very smooth shooter. He's going to be a stretch guy. He's going to provide some nice things on that end. Like I really believe in his shot. Like looking at him pre-draft, I was like, I didn't have him on my list for the Bucks again because of the defensive issues and everything. But just looking at him as an overall prospect, I was like, I don't mind this guy. Like I really believe he can be a very good shooter in the NBA. Like, there were some comparisons to like almost like a Lauri Markkanen type of player on offense. And so it's like, yes, he's a very intriguing prospect on that end. Defensively, I'm not getting my hopes up. I'm just not. I remember listening to a podcast with Sam Vecini, who studies this stuff a lot more than me. And he said he might be the worst defender in the entire class that he saw. Yeah. And so I just was like, I'm not going to believe that he's going to become some great defender. If he does, fantastic. And that would dramatically increase his ceiling. But I think the focus on him should be, just shooting, as you said, and being that kind of scoring, like his combination of size and scoring is not common, just being able to shoot at that size and being able to confidently pull up and stuff. Like he has some really intriguing skills for his size on offense. And so I'll be looking for him to continue to progress on that end. And, that's where I think he'd be making his impact is on offense, and any defensive stuff you get would be a plus.
Yeah, I think, and another play like kind of overlaps almost with Bobby Portis in some ways in that end. But I think, I don't think he's going to be better year one than Bobby by any means. I think you look down the road of like what they do, and I think there's a world where Tyler Smith is a better fit for the Bucks than Bobby, even if they have similar defensive limitations, because I think just more of an off-ball player, like a very seamless off-ball player. I think the athleticism really intrigues me. Like I thought some of the athletic rebounds he got in summer league, I was like, okay, there's a little more there than I thought. Defensively, he has no idea what to do. So I think it's just like get him to a level where he can just be normal bad, not like where is he even supposed to be right now bad. I think he could probably contribute, maybe not this year, but the Bucks' very thin big rotation. Maybe he will actually get more run than AJ Johnson. I hope we see him with Giannis too, because it's like really exciting skill set wise. He just has to figure out like what he actually does on the court. Yeah.
And I was just going to say, I think maybe there is more of a chance than I think that he could become at least an okay defender, given that, the physical tools are there. He has that, which that's kind of what NBA teams look for is, okay, do you have the physical tools, and we'll get you to kind of maximize that. Yeah. It's a matter of him, the IQ on defense and just the awareness and all of that. Doesn't, like you said, he doesn't really know where to be on that end. He's not very good at reading things. It's just, he's got to get used to playing defense in the NBA level and against top competition and just knowing where to be. But that could come with time. I'm not going to expect that, but I do think compared to someone who just strictly is slow and just is unathletic and something like that, where you're just like, I don't really see the path for them being a good defender at all. You at least see somewhat of a path for Tyler Smith. So I guess that gives me a little bit more hope. And, again, if they're going to take shots on players, like I kind of rationalized it after the draft where I was like, okay, if you're going to take shots on guys, I don't want them to take shots on guys, but if you're going to on these young, unproven, very raw prospects, I don't mind it being on guys that do have that athleticism, have that base that they can kind of build off of, just being fast, athletic type of players that give them a little bit more upside. So, still things to like about him. And the shot is the main thing. I just think watching him shoot, it's like you can clearly see like this guy's got a beautiful looking shot. So that's the main intriguing thing. And like I said, anything else you get defensively is just a bonus to me.
Yeah, I think the Ignite was just such a mess that I'm intrigued to see, like, get him in a real program, an org that's pretty well regarded at this point for development across the G League and NBA level, and just see what he can do in a few months and in a year, things like that. But yeah, I think it's very, very traitsy of them. They kind of went NFL with this draft of like, you know, forget what he looks like now. Like, what can we get him in our system? Which is, I'm excited to see how it works. It's not been their approach. I mean, kind of veered that way a little bit recently, but for a long time it was like old college guys who could shoot. Yeah. And it's. I think at least this is fun, and you know, I'd rather have these two guys than like. And I love this player. I'd rather have Tyler Smith or AJ Johnson than Wes Matthews again, right? Like then the 37-year-old wing where it's like, maybe he's gonna play. I don't know if we want him to play, but he's here, and the coaches will love him. And no disrespect to Wes Matthews, he might have another good year. I'm ready to try some young guys and take some flyers. But thank you so much for taking the time, Nathan. This has been a great run through the whole Bucks roster. I had a blast. I hope you enjoyed as well. Very generous with your time. Let the people know where they can find you ahead of the season. And yeah, that's, plug away.
Yeah, I mean, mainly I am on Twitter at Nathan Marzion, just my name. Constantly tweeting stats, memes, everything in between, just about the Bucks, and big Packer fan, big Marquette fan. So also the Cubs. I'm not going to say they came back from 10-3 down today, so they had a nice comeback win. Only 8.5 games behind the Brewers, I think now. So that's coming. All.
Yeah, I'm talking to a Giants buddy I work with today. He's like, you can afford to just drop all the rest of the games to the Giants. You guys are set. I was like, no. The NL Central, there's always the last second thing. We cannot. So Brewers lost yet. They need to win today. But anyway, we'll forgive the Cubs part. You're hitting a lot of strengths on the rest of the teams there.
Yeah. So mainly on Twitter at Nathan Marzion, and then I also do some writing for Behind the Buck Pass on Fansided. So I come out with articles usually once or twice a month on there, covering different Bucks related topics, and throughout the season as stuff happens, I'm very into the analytics and the stats behind everything. So usually a lot of that stuff in those articles. So yeah, check me out on Twitter mainly at Nathan Marzion.
Go check him out and follow him if you don't already. Be sure to check out Behind the Buck Pass too. I think everyone on our network has written for that site at some point. A great institution on Bucks content. So thank you everyone for listening. Thank you again, Nathan, for taking the time. Make sure to subscribe to this show if you're new here or haven't listened before. We're on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts on audio. Check out gspn.info for our own written content as well as our premium option where you can get commercial-free pods as well as some bonus content each week. And pod random, and we will talk to you next time.